Alright, so this is basic setup of 3D Studio. This is my Solid Rocks panel, which you won't have by default. I want to attach my drawing file, so I'm going to go up to this little symbol, go down to Reference, and Manage Links. I'm going to use my preset. I'm sorry, I got to select my file first. My file, I already have it ready to go there. I'm going to say Open. This hasn't attached it yet. It's asking for the preset, which I have this preset, AutoCAD Drawing Save from AutoCAD. I have it already set up. A couple things I change for my workflow from the defaults. Again, you just want to make it look like this. I have these two checked, and I want to bring it in as layer blocks. This one. Spline rendering, there's nothing I'm real concerned about. I want these off generally. And I don't want the drawing helper at the origin. It's just another piece of stuff I don't want to see. Alright, we're going to save that, and then we're going to go back here and say attach this file. I guess you can selectively bring in layers, which might be useful. But I'm going to go ahead and attach this file. It looks just like the 3D file we've been working on. The first thing I'm going to do is set up my... I'm going to close this. I don't need it for a while. If the original drawing file gets saved, you simply go into that Manage Links again, go into the files, and click that and say Reload, and it will bring your drawing in again. I like to use my left two views I keep this one at the top view, wireframe, so I can see what's going on. This is the left side wireframe. For now, that's fine. This is wireframe. I like this to be my working viewport that I do my drawing in. I like this viewport to be my finished camera view. So what I want to do in this viewport is change it from wireframe, let's see, from wireframe to default shading. The other thing is I don't want grids in any of my viewports. So if I click in a viewport and type G, it turns off my grid. I just don't like them. They get in my way. You could set that grid to be units so you can get an idea of measurements, but I just don't use that. I use this as close to AutoCAD as I can. This view up here, I'm in a orthographic projection right now. I want to hit P on my keyboard. That changed me into perspective. I guess you can probably change it up here too. I just always hit P. Orbiting on here, I'm sure there's an orbit icon somewhere. I tend to use Shift and Alt, and the middle mouse button does it here. You have to experiment. All these programs use Shift, Control, right mouse button, but this is Alt, middle mouse button. So this is my working view. This is where I'm going to go in and do things. This I want to be my camera. So right away I think I'm going to set up a camera. For right now I'm going to say Create. I'm going to move over here to my camera objects and create a physical camera. This may vary in 3ds Max 2018. I think they switched cameras again. But I'm going to select my physical camera, and I'm going to go into my top viewport and click where I want the camera to be and drag to where I want it to look. So for now that's good. Now if I right click in any viewport, it gets me into that viewport without changing my selections. If I right click in my viewport, it changes, and then if I hit Alt Q, whoop, no, not that one. Let's undo whatever I just did. Alt W, whatever window is active with this yellow line around, Alt W makes it full screen, which is helpful when you're working. I'm going to go into this camera viewport by right clicking and then type C. Because this camera is selected, it's going to change my viewport to where the camera was. Another command I like to use, if I know there's more lines and maybe some window openings, I want to use my F4 key. Turns on my lines. I can move this camera around I use these commands a bit, move and rotate. Occasionally I use scale. I'm going to move, and my camera is already selected, so I can free drag it here. I can grab my target and move it up here. So that gets me a camera set up. I guess I should get the camera in a way that I can see the whole building. So what I'm going to do is go into my camera settings this is my create panel. This is the modify panel. I want to go into there while my camera is selected. Just the camera. You don't want the camera and the target selected because you won't get the options. So I'm going to click away and click this camera again. Again, you can always select things by typing H or hitting this button up here, select by name, same command. This brings up a customizable palette way to select everything. It brings in all my layers, and I might have layers within blocks, so they might show up a few different times. These buttons up here turn on and off things, which is helpful for finding just a camera or just my solid objects. I don't necessarily want to see all these lines because, in fact, what I'm going to do is go into the lines. I'm going to select them all because I'm only concerned about 3D geometry. So I'm going to select these, say OK, and then I'm going to right-click in here, and I'm going to say Hide Selection. The other thing I want to do is get my viewport to be the size of my camera. If I select this camera and start going through the options, it is going to actually, the size of your render is more dependent upon your render settings, which I had dragged over here. In your common render settings, you want to change your output size to whatever you're working with. Well, I want to use a photo sized, which is going to be say 800 by 600 for now. And then I want to right click in my viewport to make sure I'm there, and then Shift F makes your frame size the same size as your render. So yeah, I guess I want it pretty square because it's going to be a tall building. Now I know it's drawn through the ground. I'm going to go ahead for right now and just draw a plane. So once I go into the draw, I was using my Forest Pro a minute ago, which is in this selector. You can go back to your standard primitives. In there is a plane. I can draw it anywhere I want. It's probably going to draw that at the 0, which is the first floor. I'm going to go ahead and right click in here and say unhide all, so I get that geometry, and I'm going to use that as a reference. I can also switch views with this little guy up here. I'm looking at the back. I want to look at the front, and I want to move that line down roughly to where my ground plane is. I probably don't want the ground plane to be blue, so I'm going to go back to and I think I skipped the material step. So what I'm going to do is real quickly unload what I brought in, detach it, yes, and I'll attach it again. And what it's not showing is that when you initially bring it in, the default material is black. Now I think this screen capture, I'm going to move my material palette over just in case. I'll delete that just to show you. When I take this eyedropper tool and pick that, it's going to give me whatever material is on there. Generally this comes in and I have to double click it and go over my properties and tell it to use color, and I can select the color I want everything to be. So if I want it to be a clay color, I can do that. I'm going to go ahead now and drag this material onto that ground plane. So everything is the same color now. I'm going to go ahead and close it because I'm not going to deal with materials. So the next thing I'm going to do is use my SolidWorks toolbar to expand it. I generally turn off options, although I want to configure them. I don't want this V-Ray log shown. I'll leave it on for now so you can see what it does. But I'm going to do a mini preview while I'm looking in the camera viewport. Again, this is this V-Ray log. It's just an extra window that I end up closing every time, so I'm going to turn that off. Now it's black because I don't have any light in the drawing. So I'm going to go ahead and add a daylight system. It's the easiest way to get exterior light quickly. So I'm going to go up to Create. I'm going to go to Lights, Daylight System. Now while I'm in this command, I'm going to Alt-W, so I'm back in the 4 viewports, and I'm going to go work in my top view. So I am going to click and drag. That's going to give me a compass rose. I want that relatively small. I don't want to take up the whole drawing with it. Creating an MR sky, yes. Now it's going to drag a sun up. Now this sun is actually not compatible with V-Ray. You need to change that. This is compatible with Mental Ray, which is the onboard rendering engine in 3D Studio. So when that sun is selected, I'm going to go up to the properties panel here, and daylight properties. This is MR sun. I want to change that to V-Ray sun. And it's going to automatically add a V-Ray environment map, which is great. That's what's going to give us our sky color and our light from our sky. There's a map in the slot. Would you like to replace it? Yes. I'm also going to say skylight. This is something we don't need, so I'm going to say no skylight. Now if I right click in this viewport and go to my preview panel, do a mini preview, okay, it's way overexposed because I haven't set up the camera settings yet. So again, this could be a little different in 2018, but some of the numbers are going to translate. I want to turn off basic. I guess we could show a horizon line, which added this black line. That could be handy. I'm going to leave my presets at 35 millimeters. My focal length is where I get my perspective. That's the one I change. So this is like a, opposite of a wide angle lens. If I go down to 22, that's more like a cell phone. Now you can see I've zoomed way back. This might give it some neat perspective. I'll generally start at like 35 millimeters and work from there if I want to see something different. Zoom 1, you can change that, which will zoom you in and out of that. I'll leave that at 1. Aperture, generally for exteriors in daylight, you're at 8. For interiors, you might go down to 4. This is the setting that changes my exposure. So I'm going to go to shutter type 1/seconds, and 200 I happen to know is generally works for daylight. And then I want to go down to the exposure and change it to manual and 100 ISO. Daylight, that's fine. You can customize your light balance there later, but for now I think this is good. The only other thing I want to do is go down to perspective control and do my auto vertical tilt correction. That's going to straighten my vertical lines up. It's just more presentable. And that's pretty much all my camera properties. If I do another mini preview while I'm in that viewport, now this is starting to look like a building. Obviously fake colors and overexposed, so we can adjust that. In fact, there's an auto exposure function in SolidRocks. By clicking this thing, it will automatically try to darken it. And for now, I'm going to leave mine because I like this better. I think by the time I put real materials in there, it'll look realistic. So I'll say cancel. Okay, I guess that's the next step. Now, some things to note: if I'm accidentally in this viewport and I do a render, it's going to be overexposed because my exposure settings are per my camera. Now there are 10 different ways to configure that in 3ds. The other thing you want to take a look at by pressing the 8 button on your keyboard should bring up this environment. This is bringing up a V-Ray sky. If I hit my M or hit this little material editor button, it'll bring my materials back. I can drag this in here, and this is my parameters for my sky. Now that's all dependent upon my sun node, which if I click my sun and say setup, it sort of takes me over to this panel, which gives me, I can change my location on a map, I can change the month of the year. Let's go to I can change, by the way, I can select the crosshairs and rotate them to change my direction of north. I'm going to go back and click the sun, and I've got 2 things selected, so I got to zoom in and try to get that. And I'm going to change that to, say, 4 in the afternoon. That's probably 4 in the morning, so I can actually slide these around. I like to set it up in a way that, and looks like the end of this tutorial.